Welcome to Societal Shapers, a podcast by PL Kadila, the place to get inspired, find your purpose and courage, and get tools to become the next female leader, creating real results and meaningful changes.
Okay, so let's start the session, everyone. Thank you so much, Suri, for joining and taking this invitation. I'm going to introduce Suri quickly. So Suri Kemp, right, Suri? Sorry? Kemp. Suri Kempe is currently the program manager at Musawah. It's a global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family that works to advance human rights for women living in Muslim contexts. So prior to that, Suri worked with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. She's also worked with the Ministry of Women, Family, and Community Development in the Malaysian NGO Sisters in Islam. And she's also a co-founder of Queer Lapis and a co-conspirator of many different social justice projects globally. So Suri and I go way back as well. We went to the same school, and very, very proud and actually very inspirational that Suri's been in this field for the longest time that I've ever remembered. So thank you, Suri, for all the work that you've done. It's a much needed space. And the only reason why I am particularly invested in this space is because I went through a really bad Sharia experience myself. So it was supposed to be a straightforward, simple, divorce case, Malaysian and a non-Malaysian. And there was, of course, a lot of other things involved, i.e., child visitation, child maintenance. There was also some assets, matrimonial assets. But the divorce itself took 8 years. And I just want to say, to some people, when we say 8 years and the reaction is, oh, that's so long, what you had to go through, that's horrible. And then they move on, right? But people don't realize that is 8 years. That was 8 years of my youth that was literally robbed off of me. The opportunity or even the window to remarry, to have more children that I want. Today I can't have more children because I have, other cases which basically will not allow me to get pregnant again. And people don't realize how this impacts one's mentality and emotional well-being. And I think, this is such a great time and great moment for Musawah to be launching the campaign. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Suri, to tell us a bit more about, what is this campaign about?
Right. First of all, Pia, thanks for having me. It's really nice to get to hang out and do this with you. So the campaign, I recognize the problems. They're not unfamiliar. Unfortunately, I also had a tough divorce. I went through the same system, but didn't take quite as long. But this is par the course, it seems, if you get married as a Muslim in Malaysia, right? Mm-hmm. It's quite a difficult thing to navigate, and I feel like oftentimes the entire experience leaves women in particular feeling extremely wary, feeling extremely isolated and very lonely. Yep. Because at the end of the day, there's so much at risk for you. The possibility or the chances of you either losing a child or not having the freedoms that you had pre-marriage, for example, the freedom to go out, to talk to friends who, God forbid, might be male, to just hang out with people. All these minute little things have implications on how that might be and how that might be perceived by the Sharia court, and how that can be spun against you to make you look as if, to portray you as a bad Muslim woman, and therefore not entitled to maintenance, not entitled to your child, not entitled to so many things. And it is an extremely scary experience. But I think at the end of the day, what we also then walk away with realizing is, while this is extremely personal and has such personal consequences on us as people, as individuals, the issue is also systemic. It is a problem with the courts, the lawyers, the judges who tend to be gender insensitive, at so many levels you face so many of these different roadblocks. For example, lawyers who may not be know how to best represent you and your interests in this sphere. So it is a systemic problem, and it doesn't sit in isolation, right?
Yeah.
So for the past decade, Musawah has really been researching how women are discriminated against under Muslim family laws around the world, not just in Malaysia, but around the world. And our research has identified that at least 45 countries in the world have some form of codified or uncodified Muslim family law, which has discriminatory provisions, procedures, and practices. Right? And through our research, we've documented at least Muslim family laws in at least 33 countries out of those 45. And you'll see on our website that we have this documented in tables in different areas of the law, how they discriminate against women. But a key finding that we came across is that while the laws are completely diverse, there's no one Muslim family law that is the same as another. So no Muslim family law in the world is the same. And so while they're diverse in terms of nature, in terms of the influence of, they all draw from Muslim jurisprudence, they all draw from colonial legacies and local customs and local practices, but they're similar in the areas that they discriminate against women, in particular, these 12 areas which influence women, which affect women at the time they enter into marriage, during the marriage, and at the dissolution of the marriage, so at divorce, right? And so, for example, so this thing that we know as Muslim family law is this big umbrella term for a whole host of issues, including, say, for example, women's consent to marry, their capacity to enter into marriage, like how some women are required to have a wali, to have a guardian that gives them away at marriage, regardless if it's their first, second, third marriage, they require a wali. Polygamy, divorce rights, child marriage, women's financial capacity after divorce is a huge one. Custody, guardianship of children, inheritance, violence, the violence that women experience in marriage, and even nationality rights. These are a host of issues that fall under this large rubric of what we know as family law. And so it was clear to us that discriminatory family laws were not high on the government's reform agenda at all. Yep. This is something that's common both here and in other countries. And it's not considered a priority either among a lot of women's rights, human rights concerns by government. So development agencies also regard it very highly. You know, it's just one of those things because, why is this? Because it's such a difficult topic. It's so difficult because as soon as you start engaging with this, you have to tackle the issue of religion and tradition and culture. And as soon as that happens, it becomes messy and complicated. And that's why a lot of even feminists or activists, women's rights activists have chosen not to deal with this issue because of why, because it's so complicated. So they refrain from taking up the cause. But we can see that activism is happening among Muslim women's groups all around the world, from in Muslim communities at the national level in countries like Morocco, in Jordan, in Indonesia, in India, in Sri Lanka, in so many countries, there are these pockets of movements of activism that are demanding for reform and for change. And there's so many strategies and lessons that need to be, that can be learned from each other. But what we realized was that there wasn't enough of a dialogue and sharing that was happening between these movements. So unlike we have movements like global movements like violence against women or FGM, and even child marriage has recently gotten a huge push in terms of international spotlighting. But family law reform, despite how fundamental it is, because it affects us first in our homes, at our personal level, within the sphere of the family, which is what we know as the basic unit of society, is not a global movement. And there is no global call to action to reform discriminatory family laws. And thus, that's why we decided that the decades-old family laws around the world, which have been untouched by changing times, they need to be reformed because they aren't reformed because there's this prevalent myth that because they draw on religion because they're influenced by religion. They are God's laws. And if they're God's laws, they are divine and therefore they cannot be changed. And that is scary for people. And that is why I think there has been a lack of movement on that. But what we're doing, the work that we've been doing shows actually that reform is not only necessary, but it is possible. It can completely happen. And so I guess to answer your question on the campaign, we launched in March of this year. It was supposed to happen at CSW in New York in March, actually in person, but because of the MCO and because of the travel bans that came around, we ended up launching the campaign online. So it's been launched in March. We had worked for about a year prior to prepare the groundwork and produce resources for activists and policymakers, and really then launched it in March. And I think the campaign will keep going. We're giving ourselves a 5-year timeline to really push this issue into the global spotlight and make sure that that there is that global pressure to really mobilize and build that global pressure to demand for reform in Muslim family laws across the world in different countries.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Suri, for explaining how Musawah decided to launch this campaign. A lot of the introduction that you've mentioned, and this call for reform that's happening globally, it is so good to hear. It is music to my ears to hear that finally something is moving, all right, some energy is vibrating out there. And just for the audience to know, one of the reasons why I decided to also invite Suri and do this podcast is to actually create and increase that level of awareness, because every one of you can actually play your part and you can make a difference and you can actually spread the word, right? That's the most important part. And bringing it back to the reason why we want to run this. Sorry, the more people. Zaina is joining the audio. Okay. So yeah, thank you everyone for you joining in now. It's such an important point and pivotal moment, and I think historically, especially for Malaysia, for this to happen now, it's such an important time and moment. And this level of awareness is not just about Musawah. So Musawah has taken that courage and boldness to run something like this, despite it being so difficult. And as Suri has mentioned earlier, the reasons why government does not want to take up this issue, because there's so much involved in it. There's politics. It's really dirty at the back, right? Because there's so much things intertwined, and that's reality. And really, this is something which I mentioned to Suri earlier. When I tell people, yeah, it took me 8 years to get my divorce, and when people react and say, oh, I'm really sorry, and that's really horrible for that to happen. And then that's it, right? And then they'll say, okay, how can I help you? How can I, either financially or help you find a job? That is not enough, and that is not what I want. We are in 2020, and I can't believe, we are still going through this. Honestly, like, how can people not understand that this is something which is so archaic just by logical thinking, right? And it's so difficult to change the mindset and behavior. And I have so much respect for Musawah to start this, and I hope people from everywhere around the world who's joined this podcast can also do your part. And just by saying, how can I help you financially, or by helping you to find a job, to me that is unmeaningful. You need to do more. You need to speak out. You need to speak up, and you need to share, and you need to fight for something. So this is such a timely and opportunity. So Suri, tell us a bit more in terms of like, what are the objectives of the campaign, and how can we help Musawah with this campaign?
So I think one of the big things I think you pointed out rightly so is that the issue is that it's a systemic problem, right? And it's not enough. I mean, it's not enough to tell someone who comes out of a messy divorce, or who might have just lost a child, or who has a child but is now not getting maintenance, that here, let me give you a handout, right? The issue isn't like, I don't need patchwork solutions to the problems. Yes, I'm grateful, thank you. But the real issue lies with the system and the legal framework. The legal framework that sets men and women up as unequal. And that is one of the biggest issues. So with the campaign, I mean, going back to the question you asked about what the objectives of the campaign are, the main objective is really, one of the main objectives is to make reform of discriminatory family laws a priority human rights issue, not just for governments, but for women's rights movements and international actors. And what we want to do with the strategic collaborations with regional, with national organizations, with people like you, with global organizations, is to really spotlight the critical urgency of reforming family laws, right? The second objective would be that we want to break down the myths and misconceptions around reforming Muslim family laws, because we know people are daunted by how impossible the task seems. But I think Musawah's work for the last 10 years has clearly shown that it is not only necessary, but it is possible. And we want to garner more support for egalitarian family laws. And we can only do that by creating a loud enough conversation and create so much noise around it and debate and taking this issue, making this issue dinner table talk, right? It needs to be on the lips of every single person. We need to be able to amplify this conversation in such a way that governments can no longer say, we can't hear you, right? That they can no longer say, this is too difficult for us to do. I think, so this is what we want to achieve by putting out evidence, by putting out research, by putting out knowledge resources that we've developed in collaboration with some amazing academics and activists that can, and these tools should be able to help activists and policymakers push for reform. But we especially want to do this, I think, using creative means, including storytelling and the creative arts, and mainstream this issue. And our advocacy, we want to use basically mediums that appeal, I think, to young people in particular. Sometimes I think marriage and family law seems like such an old people issue. It isn't. It isn't, because as soon as and can you hear me? I have a note saying.
Yeah, sorry, Suri. Can you repeat your maybe the last 1 minute? There was a little bit of a disconnection. Hello? Uh-oh. Let's see. Suri's frozen. And then this texture. What about, okay, I think Suri's going to leave and come back in and see if she can come back in. With everyone else, are you still online? And can you still hear me? Can you type in the chat box?
Hi.
Hi, okay. I think you got kicked out. Okay, you probably have to repeat the last 1 minute of your points.
Okay, so yes. Where was I? Dinner table talk, was that that much made it, right? Right. Yeah. So I think the one thing we want to do is not only use these knowledge resources that we've developed, the tables, the developments table that we've had on that we have on our website. We want to use all of that, but we also want to be able to, I guess, create that conversation, make that create that noise and that buzz around Muslim family law through storytelling, through the creative arts, through podcasts like you're doing with Societal Shapers, basically mainstreaming this issue and our advocacy in a way that I think appeals to youth in particular as well. Because really, I mean, that's where the future is, right? And then cliche though it may be, but it is true. And I think the most important thing that is, most importantly, I think we believe collective power of Muslim women in mobilizing the global movement to reform Muslim family laws. We know that this movement has to be led by and in collaboration with Muslim women, activists, artists, academics, content creators like you. It has to be because we know that those in power aren't just going to hand us, I think like in the words of Zainha Anwar, who leads Musawah, you know, change doesn't get served to you on a silver platter. It doesn't happen if we don't demand for it. And we know that Muslim women are a strong force that, that people need to reckon with, right? Because on top of that, we have so much sharing and learning that we can do together. So another key objective of the campaign is to increase the capacity, the skills, the knowledge, and the confidence of our own Muslim sisters to lead the movement and then to push for the reform agenda in our own countries. So it's certainly easier to do this when there's also a lot of pressure at the regional and the global level, right? But really, the crux of it is embedded in our national contexts. We need to be the change, and we need to push for it.
And I want to pause this on that moment, because as you mentioned earlier, you know, we need basically everyone to take part in the rising of awareness, in making in helping the activists who are already on the ground fighting for our rights. However, this particular area of Muslim family law seems to be something which is not easily understandable, and I think it's designed to be so that people like me can't question them, right? So, you know, it's great that you've outlined the objectives of the campaign. So now, because I know that most of my audience are the younger ones, the youths of today, and you know, unless and until you actually experience something like that, then only will you start to try and get more knowledge and be more informed, right? So before that happens, then typically people won't be so attuned to what's really happening. So maybe when you said a few things earlier, so you could explain a bit more to us. So you mentioned about moving towards becoming a more egalitarian family law. Can you explain what it is now, and what is that move towards becoming a more egalitarian family law? What does that look like visually, or maybe you can explain with some examples so the audience can understand?
So take divorce, for example. What was your experience with divorce?
So I, due to irreconcilable differences, he is British by nationality and I am Malaysian. I was pregnant with my second son at the time, and I decided to come back to Malaysia. And you know, we were not able to work things out, and finally I filed for divorce within that 1 year of coming back to Malaysia. But instead, it took me 8 years to get my divorce. Why? It is really simple and straightforward. I want a divorce. Why can't I have it? I am literally, you know, mentally and emotionally unhappy. You know, I felt very abused in the relationship, but I can't prove it because I don't tell people my problems. It happens behind closed doors. You ask me to provide you with 2 male witnesses. Where do I draw them from when I don't even live in this country? So yeah, just things like that.
And so divorce in that context is primarily in the hands of the husband, right? We don't have equal rights to divorce. A husband can say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and that's it. And then it's the woman who has to go to the court, verify the divorce. It's the woman who then has to file a claim for maintenance. It's the woman who has to file a claim for to validate the divorce, or maintenance, for iddah, for all of these other different rights, for nafaqah. For all these different rights that are due to you, you have to go to the court and make those applications. So that in and of itself is let's take that, let's focus on that. And there's your example of inequality in marriage, right? It sets it up in such a way that a lot of that power, because is based with the man and not the woman. Not, you know, because of this legal framework that sets up, that regards the husband as the protector and the provider, and the wife as servient caregiver of the family, right? and as a result, the rights that are embedded in our laws draw from this logic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It draws from this logic. And hence, we have a set of laws that treat women as dependents, and really doesn't grant them the rights that are due to them. And we have difficulty accessing these rights. And it's not just the laws that are biased against us. It's the systems, it's the courts, it's the judges, it's the lawyers. How do we fight for our rights? How do we claim the maintenance that we want? And even when we do, even when we are granted the maintenance that is due to us and our children, we don't have access to it. The enforcement is lacking. So many women complain that they get a particular allocation of nafaka, of child maintenance, and that their husbands are supposed to pay. But if the husbands don't pay, what happens then? Absolutely nothing. Husbands aren't taken to court because it's such a huge hassle on women. It's women who will have to take leave from their work. It's women who will have to make sure that their children are taken care of in order just to make the trip to the court. And if the husband doesn't show up, oh, well, I'm sorry, too bad. That doesn't sound like a very just system to me, right? So the entire thing, from the laws to their implementation is stacked against women, right? It's stacked against women. And that is not the kind of marriage, and it already sets women up as the recipients of charity almost, right? And that's not who we are or what we are, and it's not reflective of our life experiences, right? A lot of times women work, they contribute just as much and sometimes more than men to the marriage, both financially and emotionally. They bear the mental burden of having to organize their entire household, what to wear, what to cook for the entire, what the family is going to eat, what to cook, what to dress in, not just for yourself, but for your child. And in some cases, women also dress their husbands. They lay and iron everything for the next day. You go grocery shopping. You think about what expenditures you need to set aside for the entire household. That's a huge task. Men don't have that task because our society, society has let men believe that their sole responsibility is to provide, meaning financially only. I give you money and therefore everything's okay, but it's not, right? And they then they wash their hands of the planning of the household burden. I heard some men give their women the title Home Affairs Minister as if it's something to be proud of, right? Because she takes care of everything in the house and then some. But to me, that's a really condescending title that I find really problematic. Yeah. So that's an example.
Okay, that's a good one. So if I were to summarize a bit, so if the case that I went through is basically the current condition, right, and how difficult it is for me to get a divorce, moving towards having an egalitarian family law would mean more equality, more justice. If I were to ask a divorce, I wouldn't have to go through this.
It shouldn't take you 8 years, definitely not. It shouldn't even take you 4.
Right? Exactly. So that's basically what we're looking at and what we are trying to get at, trying to cut down the time, trying to make the process more fair, transparent, getting more educated people within the system and who are really, really fair and not discriminatory. So how would this campaign, Suri, help us to get there? So you explained to me before we started the live session, there's a lot of things that you spoke about in terms of how you want to activate that. Can you explain a bit more about how will this campaign help?
So Musawah is closely linked to activists on the ground. We know that there are, like I said earlier in the beginning of the podcast, we know that there are movements, that there are demands for reform happening at the national level in countries like Sri Lanka, in Egypt, in Jordan, in India. Across the world, there are demands for reform happening. But what we're asking for, one of our main asks is for our communities, women's rights movements, governments, and international actors to recognize the nature and the extent of discrimination that women face under discriminatory family laws, as well as to recognize and understand that these laws are not divine, that they can be changed, and that they can be reformed. And what we want is for these reforms the reform of these laws to be made a priority issue for governments. We are asking that marriage is treated and framed in the law as a partnership of equals between spouses, and that it should be the norm for all governments. Some says, you know, in some countries they have certain law for one community, secular law for some communities, and then for a minority within the country, as we've seen in, say, for example, Sri Lanka, you have minority laws or Muslim family laws which apply to that particular minority. And it's really difficult for them to change that law, because usually the government, we hear the excuse, or the government usually says, oh, that small community is not ready. They're just not ready for equality, right? But at the end of the day, then we have to ask ourselves, who is speaking for that community? Who is saying that they're not ready? Is it the men who don't want power, their power threatened? Is it the mullahs? Is it the people who have the authority currently that don't want their power threatened, that are saying they're not ready? Because the women are certainly not saying that. The women are saying enough is enough. They talk like you, right? They're just like you and I, saying enough is enough. I've gone through this. This is nonsense. I will not stand for it. And I want this to change. I don't want handouts. I don't want you to give me money at the end of the day to help me get by. I want a system that works for me and that will give me justice, right? Yeah, so what we're doing is, how we're planning to do this is to really work with women's groups on the ground. What we want to do is, you know, usually when you're embedded in your national context, you're so focused on work that's going on there that it becomes a very isolating exercise as well. Are we the only ones that are going through this? But what the campaign really wants to do is link all of these different stories and all of these different national contexts. So we can learn from each other. We can draw lessons from our different and individual experiences in these different country contexts, and that we can feed each other information on what strategies have worked, what will, you know, what will bring about reform of Muslim family laws. So in some countries, like we know, and reform isn't an easy task. It's not something that happens the same in all countries. I think you were referencing quoting Marwa from a previous, Marwa Sharafuddin, who's our MENA senior expert from a previous webinar. And she was saying how, and you were saying how she had said that reform doesn't happen across countries all at the same time. Sometimes small things happen and a big moment happens and everything coalesces, and that is your magical moment. The stars align and that is your magical moment, and reform and comes about, and you can change the entire legal framework. But sometimes reform happens in drips and drabs. Oh, we make a small amendment to the Domestic Violence Act. Oh, we change this section. We make this procedural change. But the important thing is that this change is happening, whether it's happening in small dribs and drabs, or whether it's happening in this one magical moment where we can push for reform, right? And the point is that at the end of the day, what we want to do is spotlight all of these, spotlight these experiences, and that we anticipate will really galvanize the pressure and really bring about that pressure, make that noise that we need, both at the national, regional, and at the international level, in order to tell governments and the international system that there's no more ignoring this. You know, the UN Women has issued reports, for example, saying that one of the priority areas for reform is family laws. Without, you know, cross-cutting global research has shown that family law is one of the key areas that needs to change. If there is no justice, if women aren't experiencing equality in the private sphere, within the family, then there is no possibility for women to experience equality outside of the family in the public sphere. It's just not possible. We need to change attitudes within the family in order for women to experience equality all around, right?
I love that. I love that. And I've been seeing it, I've been seeing this quote, especially in Musawah's page, where if there's no equality in the family, there can't be equality in society. And that is so true. So Suri, I wanted to ask you a bit more about, you know, you mentioned about the common myths about family law and about this whole reform. So can you share a bit more about what are these common myths and what are the truths?
Absolutely. So the common myth is that, well, if we're dealing with religion, what do we usually hear from those in power? We hear that they say, well, this is God's law, this is the Sharia. You cannot change the Sharia. It is God's will. It is divine and it cannot be changed. So just go home and sabar. So just go home, treat your husband better, and maybe, just maybe, he won't hit you, right? That's what we hear. But that is not true. Musawah's work, our work over the last 10 years, whatever, all the resources you see on our page, on our website, will show you that reform is possible, that it is necessary, that it can be challenged, that if you know the difference between Sharia, fiqh, Islamic law, for example, that Islamic law is derived from a body of Islamic legal jurisprudence, of people's interpretation of what the Sharia is, you can change the law, because the law derives from man's understanding of what the divine is. It is not in itself divine, right? We can change the law. The law isn't an expression of God, right? The law is not what Allah said, okay, you need to have this in your law and therefore it is there. That is not the case at all. We can change the law. If the law is unjust and women's experiences, women's lived realities in the country tell us that women are walking away from these marriages having injustice done to them, and they are not getting recourse or able to address this injustice, then we know that the laws are unjust and they need to change. If you want to fulfill the divine will of justice, then the laws need to change, right? So that's one of those huge common myths that people always throw at us, right? They say, oh, and on top of that, the other thing is that as a woman, you have no voice. Who are you to speak on Islam? As feminists, we always get this, right? You have no authority, you have no right to speak on Islam, and you have no voice to speak on Islam. Just go home. You don't wear tudung, you don't wear a hijab, you don't speak Arabic, and therefore you cannot speak on Islam. But we say different. For Musawah, it is, if our lives are affected by laws and policies and practices that derive from Islam, then we have the right to debate this in the public sphere. We have the right to talk about laws that affect our lives. And you cannot stop us from talking about it, regardless of whether I wear the hijab or not, right?
Yeah, so that's a really important point for people to realize, that everything that they go through, especially for women, is that even though you might think that it is the end of the road, it really isn't. It's just that you need to have more courage, be a bit more bold, and speak to more people. There are many activists on the ground doing amazing work. Reach out to them. Don't be shameful over what's happening in your private life, because this is a time that you can make change. And I think, there has been many, so in the last 8 years, as I have also been going through this, and I've been reaching out to the different grassroots organizations on the ground, I want to know how this will be different, Suri. And also for, people like myself whom I'm not officially a part of, like Sisters in Islam, for example, and many more who are like me, who are perhaps professionals. And when you're a professional, that's your life and that's your work, and it's very difficult to want to do other things. But how can I say to them that you can? Your voice matters, and this is how you can do it. You don't have to be part or a member of and dedicate your time. The time that you're spending on Instagram, looking for a handbag or whatever, you can actually do a lot more, by saying something. And so how is this campaign different from all the other campaigns and all the other work that the activists have been doing on the ground?
Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily different insofar that this campaign builds on the amazing work that's been done before us, right? And even now, raising awareness, I think I think one of the questions, I think one thing I took from that was like, why is it so important to raise awareness? What difference will that make, right? And it's key. Raising awareness, the way you're doing through this podcast, Societal Shapers, the way a lot of, by getting this into, remember this dinner table talk conversation, and by getting it into the everyday conversation is key. Because as I mentioned before, many times women go through terrible experiences and they get the short end of the stick in so many of these instances in their marriage. And I've seen women, you know, blame themselves. They get extremely frustrated with the process, with the system. And it feels, like I said, very lonely. It's a very isolating experience. But I think one of the things that I think struck me with what you said earlier was that that confidence to speak on these issues comes from, I think, first and foremost, internally from your own experiences. There is power in your experiences. There is power in your voice. And therefore, to take that should give you the confidence. But there is also power in knowledge and educating yourself and being able to articulate particular concepts about law, about why change is possible. Musawah has all these resources. We have um, policy briefs, we have knowledge briefs on our website, and I can share the links with you later in the chat.
Yes.
But we also have, I mean, for those who are too busy, we realize that everyone's on a 25-hour-a-day schedule. You know, for people who are too busy, we've also like developed animated explainer videos, which are about 3 minutes long. You know, help yourself. They're all there to help you understand these concepts, to be able to get the language to speak and talk back and fight back, right? I think it's also important to know that it's not un-Islamic. It doesn't make you any less Muslim to demand for reform, to ask for laws, Muslim family laws to change. And that there are other women out there who not only share those experiences, but are also demanding for change, who are also looking for justice. And I think that's what gives women the strength and the confidence that their voices and experiences matter. But one of the things that the campaign then wants to do is highlight all of these voices, right? And the way that you can do it as an individual is if you're doing something at the national level, if you're involved in an organization, if you're doing a podcast, something like this, something like what we're doing now, you know, let us know. We can amplify your work, right? If you're working on family law reform, if you're pushing for reform, let us know. The campaign will amplify your work. If you're an individual, you can support the folks that are doing the work in your country. So in Malaysia, Sisters in Islam is a big example of a group that is pushing for family law reform. But also do what you're doing. Host a podcast, host a talking circle, talk to your MPs, write them an open letter about why this issue is important to you and how they'll secure your vote. I will not vote unless this is an issue that is a priority to you. You know, your voice matters. Start a petition if you want. Get in touch, or otherwise, if it's still too much. I mean, have a conversation among friends. Call us. You know, we're more than happy to give you resources, stuff to talk about. I mean, I know book clubs who've looked at Musawah's publications and use that as a talking point, a point of discussion. Or, I mean, if you're in Malaysia, get in touch with Sisters in Islam. Musawah is also located in Malaysia. Get in touch with us, you know. Or if you feel like you want to learn more about the subject, just check out our website, www.musawah.org. And the Campaign for Justice is there as well. You can find out more about the campaign. But yeah, there are so many different ways to do this, to get involved, to claim your voice and claim your rights, you know, and there are just a multitude of ways to do that.
I love that. I think that's been super helpful and really insightful for people to basically expend their ideas and creativity in terms of how can they participate and be part of the campaign. So, you know, I really look forward to the day where the next, what do we call it? The snap elections, right? So whenever with the next elections, it'd be really nice to see having the rights of women in Muslim family law as part of their manifestos, right? That will be a complete, that will be a complete, like, I think overhaul or 180 change that we've been asking for, right? To include even like 2 or 3 within this manifesto is a huge progress in our society, and that's something which you know we can do now because the time is now. And I just wanted to share like the help that I received from the by the grassroots organization. It helped me a lot in gaining my confidence and my boldness in speaking up, because I did not realize that when you are at court, you are subjected to the lawyers and to the judge, and you're always fearful that you're going to be taken that your children's right away from you, like being the legitimate mother, right? You fear of losing custody, so you're willing to sacrifice everything just so you can have your children. And I think this fear blinded me for half the time, 4 years of my life when I was fighting in court. And I think the realization and the courage that the sisters in Islam and all the other Wibawa, Kak Nik Ellen, for example, has given me is that to fight for your right, to understand that when you are in court, you are fighting for your right as a woman and for your right as a mother to your children. So I, to the day that I die, I cannot forget when I was in court in that little box. The lawyer was trying to use this fear tactic and was basically trying to make me lose my train of thoughts, right? By speaking down to me as if treating me like a criminal. And at that point, I don't know how, but I mustered this courage to say, speak to me nicely and speak to me calmly, because I am here to fight for my children's rights. And I am not a criminal. You shouldn't be speaking to me like this way. And I asked, right, Yang Hakim? Yeah. And he agreed with me. And that was like, wow, I tell you, momentous. In the court, right? And I think for every woman, my friends and everyone else whom I know who go to court, they go to court with fear. Do not walk into court and be blanketed by fear, because you are not in the wrong. You are not a criminal for asking for a divorce. Do not think yourself as a criminal, and do not think that you will lose anything, because it is not for you. It is not yours to lose. So be bold. Go in there with the courage, with the faith that you know what is right, and bring it up to Musawah, because they're gonna highlight your stories and they're gonna fight for you. So thank you so much for that, Suri. So I have a couple more questions before we wrap up, right? So what would the measures of the success of the campaign be, right? Because you mentioned earlier you're looking to have this campaign for the next 5 years, and so how can we help support? How can we help accelerate and push for more power to this campaign?
Well, if there's anything you take away from this, it's like make noise, right? Make noise, amplify the demand for reform of family laws.
Yeah.
And that can be, I know we've got a little bit of an international audience.
Yeah,
we do. I know we've got a little bit of an international audience, yeah. If there is work, reform of family laws that's going on in your national context, support that, amplify that. In Malaysia, amplify the calls for reform. I mean, if not, and so one of the things I think that would be a marker of success would be this crescendo of loudness, right? Like that it's growing louder and louder. These calls for reform are becoming louder and louder and stronger to a point where governments cannot ignore us, right? I think seeing mounting pressure on governments to push for reform is one of those measures of success, but also seeing more people speak. So, if like, let's say take Malaysia, shouldn't be the only one that's calling for reform. It should be coming from all these different quarters of society, like it could be petitions, it could be women in whatever way, shape or form that are calling and demanding for reform. Talking to your MPs, for example, is a huge thing, getting the women in your constituency who are in your voting constituency to make this a priority for your MP or any of the MPs that are running for elections, Like if we know our MPs are running for elections and we go see them as a constituency of women and say, look, this is a priority issue for us. If you don't fight for us, we won't vote for you. That is a hugely powerful statement. Come up with artwork or music or anything that also engages people and has them talking about the issue of family law reform. That as well is something interesting.
What were the challenges that you had when you worked with the Ministry of Women and Family Affairs?
In what sense?
So you worked with the Ministry of Women and Family Development before, right? And so when you were working with them, were these the issues that you were pushing for and you were working with them?
it was one of them, because that it was one of the issues that fell under the scope of the Ministry of Women.
How did that go?
Yeah, I mean, it. I think it's a collective process, and also I was just one of the actors, right? I was one of the actors that facilitated maybe some conversations, etc. I worked in Parliament as a parliamentary liaison for the ministry and for the minister. And of course, the minister that I worked for then, that was Sri Sharizat, she was a skilled politician, right? But her strategy, and she was then with the government of the day then, like the BN party. I mean, her strategy was to have a lot of closed door conversations, which, you know, depending on context, that might be a strategy that works. But I know that she was supportive of women's rights. I know that she was supportive of reform, but politics is politics, you know, so I can't comment further than that. But I do know that what strategies you employ in order to reach your goals really depend on your context. If you think that the way to change law is to then have closed door conversations with fellow ministers, then that's the way to go. As activists, we might not have that privilege or those doors open to us, right? A lot of times you see groups like Sisters in Islam that are dismissed by saying, oh, you're anti-Muslim, you're deviant, we will not talk to you, you know, we won't talk to you, we won't even engage with you. And so different strategies are required then to make sure that the government listens, to make sure that there are spaces for reform. Because we really, what we need to do is then create that space for ourselves. If doors are shutting around us, we need to be able to create that space in such a way that we, you know, the government cannot ignore us. State and non-state actors cannot ignore us and the demand for change. Sorry, I'm hearing a lot of background noise. I see.
Yeah, we have, yeah, could you mute yourself, please? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, go on.
Okay. Yeah, so I think, you know, that's something which is really important, as you said, Suri. And yeah, actually, where were we earlier? Sorry, I got thrown off by that.
Well, I think the question initially was challenges within the ministry. Yeah, and
Yeah,
like
so,
I was saying.
Yeah, so I wanted to also highlight, so I remember one of the discussion that, or the recording that you shared with me spoke about the recent child marriage age in Indonesia that was pushed from 16 to 19, and they managed to get that law through, and they had a strategy behind that, right? So I think they had like a few cases that they presented it together, and that was one of the reasons that the high court judge basically made a ruling and said, you know, this is something which shouldn't happen at this in this period, and therefore he called for it. And I just that's in a way that's something which why more and more people who are going through these cases should come up and speak up about your case, because then when we are presented with more cases, we can actually aggregate them, and then put them together and basically say, you know, this has been happening, is a trend over and over again. You see discriminatory at this scale, so hopefully that will be able to spur changes in the future, right? Am I telling the story right, Suri?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, and that's the power of lived realities, right? I mean, we might not be the most fluent or fasih in Islamic jurisprudence, for example, but our lived realities have power in them. Our stories have power. And our story, and you know, if someone says, oh, Islam treats women fairly, we're always treated fairly, you're put up on a pedestal, women are glorified in Islam. This is what we always hear, right? And when we come to them with our problems or whatever, they're saying, oh, well, this is God's law, go back and sabah. But in this case, you know, like, and this is what SIS does as well. Sisters in Islam does this as well, and it basically collects, so from their legal helpline, Telenisa, they collect the statistics and the calls and the issues that are faced by women. So one of the most prominent problems or challenges or issues that women keep calling them about is clearly the issue of child maintenance. A third of the calls are around child maintenance, right? So it remains one of the biggest issues that women face post-marriage. But to collect these stories and then present them to people can't say no to that. They can't look at you and say, oh, you're lying, especially if many women come with those stories. Exactly. You know, like if we need to go see, I don't know, the Sharia judiciary and tell them, look, these are the problems that women are facing when they deal with the Sharia system. And look, we've submitted Musawah, Sisters in Islam submitted memorandums before, and they document all of these things. They document the arguments. A lot of the memorandums that were written document the arguments they document the Islamic arguments. They document women's lived realities. They document the constitutional arguments that argue for equality and justice. And what's the other one? National lived realities, constitution, Islamic arguments. And I'm blanking right now, but I'll get back to you on that. But yeah, you know, there's a way to frame these arguments, to put them forward in a way that people cannot ignore you anymore, you know, and never forget there's power, that you have power in your stories. And no matter how you tell them, whether it's in a formal memorandum, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through letters to the editor, social media, they have power. And they have the power to galvanize action. I mean, look at Me Too. Me Too happened online. Black Lives Matter. There's like the reason Black Lives Matter is now global is because of the momentum of the movement, right? And the effect, the rollover effect of that's having across the world, because people are sharing those experiences in their own contexts, in their own unique ways, but they relate to the issues that are being raised, right? And in the same way, women who've experienced marriage under Muslim family laws, women who are living in Muslim contexts, experience the same problems you and I faced.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And we can do something about it.
Sorry?
And we can do something about it, right?
That's
the big takeaway, that we can do something about it.
Exactly. So, you know, hashtag equality in Muslim family, hashtag equality in, no equality in family, no equality in society. And I think that's really, really powerful. So to all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry?
Hashtag free our family laws.
Yes, exactly. So thank you so much to the audience and everyone who's joined from all around the world. Thank you for making some time. So you know what to do now. We have equipped you with all the avenues for what you can do as an individual or even as an organizational level. So please do your part. Help to support the campaign for justice in Muslim family law. Tell your story, share your stories, encourage other people to share their stories as well, and never put other people down. No matter how you feel that, you know, what other people are going through, and it's better to cover their shame or, you know, whatever judgments you have about others, you know, just shed away all of those judgments and know that the time is now for change. Just like Black Lives Matter, equality in Muslim family law matters now and today. So thank you everyone for being with us. Thank you, Suri.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat box. So if you do have any questions, please write them to Musawah, of course, and you can go to www.musawah.org to find more information there. And you can also email Suri. She's written her email in the group chat. And so yeah, thank you everyone. And hope to keep in touch. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening in. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your friends. Be sure to tune in to the next episode, and to find out how to be part of Societal Shapers, head to www.plkadila.com and check out our coaching programs. Catch you soon!